little Bo Peep has lost her sheep. I can't tell where to find it. Go! Leave them alone and they'll come home. I'm bringing their tails behind them.
Hi, my name is Tamara Adams, and you're listening to the Bo Peep podcast, where men are women, women are men, and the sheep are confused. Now let's see if we can make sense of this crazy world. I am thrilled and honored to be interviewing my next guest, who is a gentleman by the name of Loy Brunson. Loy, together with his three brothers, have filed two petitions with various courts. One is the 10th Circuit, and the other is the Supreme Court of the United States. They have filed this case because as we watch the 2020 election be certified with doubt and skepticism, they too believe that the members of Congress who were encouraged by 100 senators to put a pause on the certification and to investigate as to whether or not there was foreign interference in our elections, and the refusal of Congress to do so has prompted them to file a case against them. So without further ado, let me bring on Loy Brunson and let's discuss this case. Hello and welcome to the program. I am very pleased to have Loy Brunson on the program. And what makes Loy so fascinating is that he has filed a petition along with his brothers to two courts, one of which is the 10th Circuit and the other which is the Supreme Court. Lloyd, I am thrilled to have you here, and I want you to explain to our listeners what your petition is.
Okay, sure. Thanks for having me, Tamara. I'm just getting over a cold, so.
I am too.
I think everyone is right now. Let's see. So I have three brothers, two of which were focused on these lawsuits. And what we decided to do was remember when the electoral vote was being certified, Mike Pence and others said that they were certifying the electoral vote, and then there were 100 members of Congress who wanted to pause for a 10-day investigation. And so they could have easily done that. They should have done that, actually. There were things happening where we actually required them, and I won't get into that, to do that. But they were all kind of waiving the Constitution, saying it's our constitutional duty to certify this election. And Ted Cruz and about 99 others were saying, wait a second, we have a mountain of evidence here, and we believe we should take a 10-day pause to investigate this. And what Mike Pence and others should have done was said, okay, we have a constitutional obligation to certify the electoral votes, but we've got to make sure they're real. Got to make sure that these electoral votes are legitimate, that there's no fraud involved. And in so doing, we'd better investigate the mountain of evidence and the request from 100 credible witnesses, members of Congress. We better do what they want us to do and pause for a 10-day investigation. So because they did not do that, they breached our national security. They breached their binding oath to the Constitution, and they are accountable. So what we decided to do as brothers, one of my brothers has a lot of pretty extensive legal experience. He's not a lawyer, but he's been able to represent himself in state and federal court, and even successfully had two petitions docketed at the U.S. Supreme Court. So we decided together to launch a lawsuit, then that eventually turned into two lawsuits, because we knew that two would be better than one. We knew that the chances of winning at the lower court level was pretty slim. And even if you do win at the lower court level, it can be appealed. So our goal was to appeal it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So my case started first, and it was quite a battle. I filed mine in federal court. I was the plaintiff. By the way, people can go to 7discoveries.com and download my complaint and also Rollins' complaint that is now at the Supreme Court level. So we went ahead and filed in federal court my case. And on March 31st of 2021, the federal court ordered the U.S. Marshal Service to start serving my summons and complaint. Now, the reason they did that is because Capitol Hill was locked down because of the COVID. Okay, so we couldn't hire a process server. We couldn't have deputies go in. We couldn't. The only people that could go in and serve would be the U.S. Marshal Service. So because of that, the court ordered the U.S. Marshal Service to start serving my summons complaint. So March 31st, the docket shows that Maxine Waters, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, and about 85 others were actually served my summons complaint. Okay, and then something very strange happened the next day on April 1st. The federal judge supervising my case canceled it, called it back, said it was a clerical error. Well, judges cannot do that. They cannot tell you who you can and cannot sue, right? So we took that court in a complaint. What you do, it's called a petition for writ of mandamus. What we did is we complained about his court to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, hoping the 10th Circuit would force the lower court to refile my case or allow it to be filed. And so while that battle was going on, my brother's case was going a little bit more smoothly, and we were learning from my case how to make his more perfect. So here we are and with my case in federal court, and the judge is not letting it move forward. So not only did we complain to the 10th Circuit, but because the 10th Circuit didn't help us out, we actually filed a lawsuit against the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and the federal court of Utah. We took them to state court and battled there for a while. And so we lost, but in a way we won, because after the fighting was over with, the federal court not only allowed me to file my case, but they filed it for me, and they ordered the clerk of the court to issue 388 summonses for the 388 defendants. Now, maybe I should explain a little bit what this lawsuit is. It has nothing to do with the outcome of the election.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with whether there was enough fraud or not to change the outcome of the election. It has everything to do with they didn't follow their oath of office, defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, by participating in a simple 10-day pause, 10-day investigation. Now, Article 6 of the Constitution is very clear. It states that all of our federal and state representatives and officers shall be bound by oath to this Constitution. Those are the exact words, shall be bound. Now, we found out that they've given themselves immunity, and the U.S. attorney's fighting our lawsuit against these guys. That's been their only defense, is immunity. So we're challenging immunity.
When did they file for immunity?
Oh, they've had these laws going forever.
Do you foresee them trying some funny business as lame duck Congress in the next few days?
Well, sure. That's, people talk about that. I don't know what's going to happen, but so I'll get back to the case that's at the Supreme Court right now. My case is actually still alive in federal court. Okay, so my brother's case was filed, and the U.S. attorneys fought it, and he went from state court to federal court to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So in the 10th Circuit, it got stuck. Now, you cannot go to the Supreme Court with your case until you have a decision from the final lower court, which in this case would be the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So because it was stuck there for 3 or 4 months, we decided that we needed to figure out something, because it could be stuck there forever, and we never could, get it to the Supreme Court, which was the final goal. And so my brother did some digging, my legal-minded brother, the legal expert brother, I should say, and he found that there's a United States Supreme Court Rule 11. And so we talked about this, and we knew that if we could put our petition together to the Supreme Court without getting a decision from the 10th Circuit, and we could convince the Supreme Court that this was a national emergency, then they would let us file it and docket it without getting the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals decision.
Right, and that's what Rule 11 is, correct?
The Rule 11 is basically, it's a national emergency, allows you to bypass the 10th Circuit Court or the Circuit Court. It allows you to bypass that last very important step. You just skip it. But that's depending on them allowing us to do it. So we sent it off to them and overnighted it. It's quite a process, because you have to have it printed specially, and then you have to have it bound. They ask for it to be perfect bound, like a book with a square back. Mm-hmm. And so we got that off to them, and about 5 days later, we received a phone call from the clerk of the court, the clerk's office. Now, the clerk of the United States Supreme Court is not a justice clerk. It's not an intern. This is Scott Sessions Harris, who for 11 years was the Supreme Court's attorney. And so it's his office that contacted my brother, a case analyst from his office, and told him that the court had decided to accept this petition as a Rule 11, as an emergency case, allowing us to bypass the 10th Circuit. So we're pretty excited to hear this news. And not only that, they asked us if we would include some documents that aren't required. And that was the motion to dismiss. And that was in order to speed things up, I'm pretty sure. So with that being requested, and then at the same time, they're asking us, the case analyst was asking us how soon they could get it. Like they were in a hurry to get it. It's like, okay, we'll get it to you as quick as we can. So we went to work and put their new stuff in it. And so we had to kind of reformat it by putting stuff that they wanted in it that they hadn't requested before. And as we were about ready to get that off to them, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals makes a decision. And it's like, wow, we just were notified that they had made a decision. So we didn't need to bypass them anymore. We didn't need to convince the court, even though they had already agreed it was a national emergency. So we called the court asking them if we could just get it to them without going through this big process of reformatting, eliminating that unnecessary information. And they said, no, you can take it out. We don't need it. And get that to us as soon as you can. And my brother says, okay. And then the case analyst actually says, well, how soon can you get this to us? And he said it'd be about 2 weeks. And the case analyst says, can you get it to us sooner than 2 weeks? It's like they're really putting on some pressure to get it quickly, which is great because it's like, okay, they're considering this as a national emergency. They've already characterized it as such. So this is, we'll get it. So he says, we'll get it to you as soon as we can. They said, okay, try to get it to us. And don't forget to put in what we asked you to put in. So instead of 2 weeks, we're able to get it done in a week. So on March 3rd, not March, it was October 20th, we were able to send it. They received it on the 24th and they docketed it on the 24th. So we sent it on a Thursday. They received it Friday. They docketed it on the following Monday. And they also showed that it was filed the day we mailed it. Now, once it was docketed, they also sent my brother some documents asking us one of the documents was a waiver, waiving the U.S. Attorney's right to file an opposition to this petition. So they have asked us to get it to the U.S. Attorney. So here we are sending a document to the U.S. Attorneys asking them to sign it to waive their right to oppose this petition before it goes into conference. So it's like, whoa. Okay, so my brother also followed up with a phone call asking them to please sign the waiver and explain to them that we had put their motion to dismiss in our petition, which wasn't required. So in a way, that could be their opposition. We'll do it right. So to speed things up, we asked them to sign that. Well, about 30 days go by. They have a deadline now. The court has given the U.S. attorneys a deadline of November 23rd, which is about 30 days later, day before Thanksgiving, to file an opposition or to ask for an extension or to file the waiver, sign the waiver. So the 23rd rolls around, their deadline. We're hours away from their deadline. And we are checking the docket and we see that on the 23rd, like the last few hours up until the deadline, the U.S. attorneys are no longer representing the 388 defendants. Now, let me just mention the 388 defendants are 385 members of Congress, a vice president and president of the United States. So this petition gives the United States Supreme Court the full power to remove from office a sitting president, a sitting vice president, and 385 members of Congress. Not only remove them, but bar them from holding public office the rest of their lives in any capacity, federal, state, or local. Okay, so here we have this petition to them, and the deadline is just a few hours away. The U.S. attorneys, we checked the docket, and the U.S. attorneys are no longer representing 380 defendants. Instead, they have a new attorney, and it's the United States Solicitor General representing all the defendants, and she comes on as the attorney of record, and she doesn't ask for an extension. She doesn't file an opposition, but instead she signs the waiver, waiving their right to oppose this before it goes into conference. And so once they did that, a few days later, we checked the docket, and it shows that the conference is scheduled for January 6, 2023. And that's like, whoa, this is amazing. So that's kind of where it's at right now. I'd like to explain that conference is not a hearing. The technical term for hearing is when, for your listeners, is when both sides are able to be heard in their arguments in front of the justices. And so the conference, none of that is allowed. It's only this 9 justices go into a room and they review this. They've had this for weeks now, and they take a vote. And if 4 out of the 9 votes are to move it forward to a hearing, then it moves forward to a hearing. So that's scheduled for January 6th. But the fact that this has already been categorized as a Rule 11 emergency petition, under Rule 11, the Supreme Court justices have the full power to completely adjudicate the whole complaint. In other words, they can judge the whole complaint. Usually, a Supreme Court will uphold a ruling from a lower court or reverse a ruling from a lower court. But in this case, as a Rule 11 emergency petition, they have the full power to completely, behind closed doors, in private sessions, completely adjudicate the whole complaint, offer, take care, execute it, offer the relief, everything. They have the power to do that should they choose to do it.
Do you have a sense of the timeline of how long that might take? Like, say they decide that they're going to hear this, what would be the likely timeline for something like
usually
that?
Usually now this is not a usual case. The last time an attorney did some checking, and he only found that the last time a Rule 11 petition was even docketed was in the 70s. Okay, and that was the U.S. government was doing that. Okay, so this is an extremely rare case. It's not like any other. The fact that they categorized it as a Rule 11 emergency. So, no, we don't have any indication. The only indication we would have would be of what they're feeling or what they're doing would be the fact that they accepted it as a Rule 11, the fact that the U.S. Solicitor General waived their right to oppose it, the fact that they wanted us to insert more information in it, the fact that they wanted it soon, they were pushing for it to be to them in less than 2 weeks, and then the fact that they docketed for January 6th, which is a 2-year anniversary of why we're bringing this lawsuit forward. And so those are the only indicators we have of what they're thinking. Now we can analyze the justices. This is, like I said, this has nothing to do with the outcome of the election.
Mm-hmm.
And but there have been some Supreme Court cases that were about the outcome of the election.
Correct.
And those cases were actually 3 of the justices voted in favor of those cases. They were Trump-related cases, and the 3 justices that voted in favor of those were not the Trump-appointed.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So you had Alito, and you had Thomas, and you had Roberts.
That was very unlikely.
Yeah, so Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch voted against them, and maybe because they were appointed by Trump, maybe they felt like they had to, or the whole world would come in blue, right? The whole country. Right. But since then, a lot has happened. Roe versus Wade, all the pressure on the justices and members of Congress threatening Gorsuch and Barrett, we're coming after you. You're gonna get it from all these threats, and then they're not protected in their homes. So we can just kind of read what's happened to them and their attitudes and how they've been voting lately. This is literally an opportunity to enforce the oath of office and the Constitution without it being political, because there are Democrats and Republicans that would be removed from office. And this would be actually the positive side to this. Can you imagine how many campaigns would support this petition by promoting their candidates to replace these representatives? So this could actually be a fairly smooth transition.
Well, let's talk about that transition. So I was trying to map out various scenarios in my own head, and I spoke with a number of my friends and colleagues. As I mentioned, I ran for office in New York City in the 2020 election, and I'm friends with a number of people who ran for office, particularly Congress. And we were discussing this case, and then they were saying if the candidate they ran against were in the 388 that get removed from office, does that mean that they automatically have won their election and now they're got to pack up and go to Congress in DC? How would the execution of this even really work?
Well, that's a good question. I think the justices have a lot on their plate with this case to figure out everything. Yeah, so I haven't got a clue.
I know, and this is really unprecedented. Furthermore, if they think that they, kicked the hornet's nest with Roe v. Wade, this is like they've kicked the mother of all hornet's nest with this case. And if they didn't feel safe in their homes before, I mean, this is
Well,
really.
actually, they could take some action. This case has 380 defendants, but it also has John Doe's 1 through 100. So the Supreme Court actually has the power to add defendants to this case. Now, the federal communications directors are presidentially are appointed by the president, and they have taken an oath of the Constitution. So the Federal Communications Commission is responsible making sure that none of the broadcast stations promote anything that would undermine the Constitution or undermine the United States of America. So they have an obligation to protect us from false news, from false information. Every army on the planet, every government that has an army has a psychological warfare division, psyops, and what it is propaganda. So the communication directors have an obligation to protect us from propaganda. So the government could actually send special broadcast teams into the broadcast houses. They could actually go into the federal communications directors' offices and visit with them and set them aside, almost like a receivership where they have a temporary controls to keep things peaceful. So I think we could actually see new faces on the news where they start broadcasting in real time what's happening. And they wouldn't be faces that anyone would recognize as conservative or liberal or whatever. It would be real news explaining what had happened, that there's been a national breach and that it's being, fixed, and that there's going to be a smooth transition. And this would be a great prevention of vandalism, riots, insurrection, stuff like that. And so they could also have National Guard. They could also have military in different places to keep the peace. And so I think it could actually be a pretty positive transition, especially with all the new campaigns that propped up. If that's the way they did it with new campaigns, there'll be some governor appointments, temporarily, stuff like that. But that's just, up for speculation.
Well, let's look at the top of the food chain. So you've also the complaint also lists President Biden and Vice President Harris. So if they were to be removed from office, how do we see this unfolding?
Well, the U.S. Marshals, it could be pretty simple. I think the U.S. Marshal Service would simply show a court order canceling the credentials of the president and vice president. The Secret Service teams would be relieved of their assignments, and at that time we would probably have a new president and vice president. It could be the Speaker of the House, Majority Leader. It could be whomever they decided. So I hope it happens soon.
Yeah. Well, would it possibly be President Trump?
It's possible. I don't know. We're just guessing here. It's possible because he didn't participate in the pushback against the investigation, and he was a sitting president at the time. So that is a possibility. Absolutely is a possibility.
Yeah, I think the country's fairly still very divided on President Trump, and
sure, it's because of the media.
Of course,
that could be
of course. I have family members. I mean, we all fight each other about who's brainwashed and who's not brainwashed, and you're brainwashed. No, you're brainwashed.
Wow.
Stuff. So so tensions run high in many families on this topic. But how many justices need to vote for hearing this case for this to actually move ahead?
Well, all 9 will vote, but we only need 4 out of the 9 to move it forward. And since this is not political, it's only about the oath of office and making it a binding oath. The Solicitor General could actually concede and say, "Hey, this isn't about the outcome. It's not political. It's not favoring one party over another. Let's just move this forward and start, cleaning house." You think of all the election denier complaints, people complaining about election deniers, pretty hypocritical because both sides have been pretty strong at complaining about election deniers. This would fix that. There should have been an investigation, and you cannot complain about an election denier if you supported a pushback against an investigation. And so it's like, let's start being reasonable in this country. Let's start seeing some real news, some honest news, and focus on the things that are people suffering and not on stuff that doesn't affect us at all. And so hopefully this is the beginning of something really great. I hope so.
Yeah, but the programming runs pretty deep. So
but that can be fixed. The media is a problem responsible for that. It really is.
Well, the media is not alone in this. Look, we've had, Operation Mockingbird, where, our own government is involved in this propaganda.
Well, that's right. And Joe's 1 through 100 can be added to the defendants list. And,
Absolutely.
people talk about military involvement and whatever. Yeah.
The problem is, it seems like every time you uncover a stone of the cabal, you find that there is just more corruption. And
Yep.
I just don't know where it starts and where it even begins. Where it ends, it's so deep.
No kidding.
Well,
it's a religious thing, isn't it? I think it's a biblical kind of thing. It's like we have to have faith in the supreme being. That our founders said that they couldn't have created this union, this country, without divine intervention. So that's what we need.
And I do believe that this lawsuit is definitely divine providence. It's unbelievable how quickly this moved, and what a sense of urgency that they seem to develop on hearing this case. So I agree with you. And I do believe that what we're fighting now is a spiritual war, which is very different than, fighting a war in the third dimension where you're, in a kinetic type of war. It's a very different type of warfare. And I agree with you that we do need to pray and put our faith in God. I also think it's very interesting and quite biblical how you and your brothers are trumpet players. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, my younger brothers, they were pretty big sluffers. They wouldn't go to school. My father, and this is pre-teenage, okay, basically. And my father was a school teacher, and so he wasn't too happy with being notified, by the court. He was actually notified by the court that his kids were sloughing school, and they were going to have a hearing and talk to him, see if he was an unfit parent or not. My parents. And so he just basically sat him down one day and said, "Look, if you're gonna skip school, it's on you. Your future is at stake. You are gonna take responsibility for your future. And if whatever decisions you make, whether it's not going to school or whatever, it's your responsibility now." Now, I remember this happening, and you would think normally other kids are just they just ignore it, right? But no, my brothers, it hit them like a ton of bricks. It's like, we're responsible now for our lives. We can't just do things, and if our parents let us or not, it's on them. But we're responsible. It was really quite a change. It was unbelievable. And so they felt this weight of their own lives on their own shoulders. And so, you know what they decided to do? They decided to graduate from high school at a super young age. And so they started getting all the materials. I think my dad helped them. And they decided they were going to study and do the GED and get their high school diplomas at a super young age, and then go from there. And so they did all that, and they passed all the tests, and they were qualified to get their high school diplomas. And the school district wouldn't let them because they were too young.
Oh my!
And so, yeah, they're too young. So that really kind of messed with it. That kind of upset them quite a bit, actually. And so they're thinking, well, this isn't working. We got to do something. We've got to make a living and have jobs later on. So I remember them saying, they decided, because they'd listened to a lot of trumpet music. They loved trumpet music, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass back in the day.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And so they decided that they were going to be the world's greatest trumpet players and be rich and famous, and therefore they wouldn't have to go to college, and they'd be able to, provide for themselves and families by being famous trumpet players, right? And so I remember them early in the morning that they would be practicing arbans as kids. Now, arbans is what studio sessions drill with. That's professional musicians go through that, and once you've mastered arbans, you can play any time signature and any sequence of notes and ranges and everything like that. So they were doing that and getting really good at it. And so, to make a long story short, that we started performing together as a group of trumpet players, and that led to over 60 national television shows, including reruns. We got to meet President Reagan.
Now to raise a joyous sound, 4 brothers whose silver trumpets took them from their home state of Utah to Hollywood, and tonight to Washington, D.C. Here are the Brunson Brothers.
We did some national touring. And so
And
we
you
did
were on
that.
the Liberace show, right?
We did 150 Liberace shows. The reason we wanted to do Liberace shows is because at that time, that was like the cleanest, most family-oriented
Hmm.
show on the planet. And none of this garbage had ever been.
I loved that show as a kid. Yeah.
So yeah, so we did 150 Liberace shows, and we played at the Greek and different places in the country, and yeah, so that was great. And then we got into doing other things, and I got into the Constitution. So my contribution to the lawsuit is the constitutional aspect of it, showing the constitutional authority behind our causes of action and our reliefs. And my brother Rollin is a programmer, and he's great at strategy. And then Darren, of course, with the legal end of it, where he knows procedures. So the three of us coming together, working on this every bit of the way, really got us to where we were going. And plus a lot of miracles. I mean, it's an absolute, so many miracles happened to put us, think of the timing of this. It's taken more than a couple of years. I've been working on my Constitution stuff for like over 12 years. And it all culminates to this point in time right now where we have an emergency petition in front of the 9 justices at this specific time in history. It's
Amazing.
just uncanny. Yeah, it's a miracle. So,
Yes. So I know you've been working on this full time over the last few years, but what was your day job prior to?
okay, well, we were doing we did a lot of music, performing and stuff like that too. So, but I've been writing books, self-publishing books and speaking, on the Constitution and focusing on that. My brother is a freight broker, and my other brother, I had a little media business for quite some time, and my brother Rollin was also doing it, where we do print and production of media for companies. So
Okay. And so one day you're sitting on the couch and just sort of watching what's going on with the country and saying, hey, this isn't right. Like, what was the spark that started the Prairie Fire, if you
okay,
will?
my brother Darren was watching the whole hearing, watching the certification hearings, and he was just when he saw that they were certifying it without the investigation, he just became more and more and more disappointed and angry. And I remember him calling me up saying, I know how to do this, because he was affected in a negative way. He had some properties. Remember the subprime?
I've worked at Merrill Lynch during the financial
Okay.
crisis. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm from finance background.
So he decided to start suing banks, which he did. He was able to keep his properties and push back somewhat. He even had a judgment against a bank. He was telling me these times he'd go in by himself, and there'd be like a team of lawyers representing a bank. And so he would fight in state and federal court. He took some courses learning civil rules of procedure, state and federal. And he says the course was really about learning the rules and following them better than the attorneys follow, because the attorneys, to streamline things, they get they have kind of agreements between themselves where they'll let things slide and they'll let things happen differently than what the rules are strictly about. And so he had all this experience. And so he called me on the phone and says, hey, how do you feel about being the plaintiff? And we'll launch a lawsuit against those members of Congress that refused an investigation. It's like, absolutely, let's do it. And so that was the beginning of it. And then we got my brother involved, and he at one point said, let's get another lawsuit going. And because one of these is going to get to the Supreme Court before the others. So the first one that I'm a plaintiff on is still in federal court. It's alive. Has not been dismissed, but his is in front of the Supreme Court justices. So I'm glad, working as a team and deciding that we should have two would be better than one lawsuit really worked out. So, but yeah, it was my brother Darren that just really got motivated to do something, and he knew he could do it. So
that's amazing. And let me just ask you this, going back to the 100 or so members of Congress and the Senate who wanted the investigation and to hold off on the certification. Did Director Radcliffe already issue his statement that there was foreign interference?
Well, I've heard stories about that, and I was on with an attorney, and I think what he was saying is that report wasn't delivered that was supposed to be. That report was supposed to be handed over before they made the decision, and it wasn't. So those elements of it I'm not that familiar with, and But Tim Canova's written an article. I think he's writing another article. He's a law professor,
Mhm.
getting into that stuff. There's some pretty interesting stuff. It wasn't that they just voted against it, but they were not following protocol. They weren't following their own rules. So they were seriously violating their oath. And I know that some of their positions would be, oh, it's just up to the states to figure out if there's fraud or not. We just accept it. It's like, no, I don't think so. No, why would you have 100 members of Congress, disagreeing with that? And why would you not go along? Why wouldn't you take a 10-day pause? So one of the reliefs we're asking for is that there be criminal investigations to find out why some of these members of Congress were so forceful in fighting against a 10-day investigation. So there could be a lot of different kind of ramifications regarding why they did what they did.
And why is the petition? Because I was looking at it. Why is it against Alma Adams? Can you explain that?
Okay, well, he's one of the. It just starts alphabetical order.
Okay.
So you have 388 defendants. It just starts with
Got it.
the members of the House and the Senate. That's why.
Got it.
Yeah, it's kind of. It would have been more. It would have been maybe more interesting if there had been a different name at the top.
Yeah, it just seemed kind of random. But and then what if they decide we're not going to hear this? What is the next step then?
The next step is we do a motion for reconsideration. There's a groundswell happening right now where people are writing letters to the Supreme Court, and some campaigns have been launched where they're asking people to also send a copy of the letter to the Brunson Brothers. So you can go to 7discoveries.com and you can click on a link and it'll take you right to more information about how to do that. So the more public support we have, the better. So right now, I think we have around 40 to 50,000 people have written letters. Okay, I would like to see that go up into the millions. And if they don't allow it to move forward, we can do a motion for reconsideration. And those letters, that's where the letters come in. They show the Supreme Court support. And the more support the Supreme Court sees, the more apt they will be in favor of a motion for reconsideration and changing their position. So it's not over if they don't allow it to move forward, but it's just a time period where we can gain more support to get them to accept a motion for reconsideration and change their position. So also the other lawsuit's alive and well too. We can bring that forward as well. But again, the public support. This is an opportunity for the public to really get involved and help push this over the goal line.
Absolutely. And that is the call to action from this interview. I want everybody to, write this letter. You can go on 7discoveries.com and there's templates there. I've already sent you my letter, sent my letter to the Supreme Court. I've included my dollar. So we thank you. And I do believe that everyone needs to make that stake with the financial commitment, although it's small. There's something about the mindset shift when you put your money into something. But everyone should be sending letters, and I've been sharing it with my friends and they're getting their kids to do it. And, it's definitely catching some wind. So I think that's fantastic. So 7discoveries.com is your website. There's other interviews I've seen on Rumble, but not a lot out there in the press and the media. And at times I'm like not knowing whether that's a good thing, let this fly sort of under the radar, or do we want to, scream this from the rooftops and have this as, the headline news? I don't know.
Well, it is growing, so it'll get there eventually. But if it moves from conference, then that would be a pretty big explosion. But we want to do whatever we can now to get the word out. And I'm accepting more interviews. I have schedules filling up with interviews. So it's getting out there. I've been on InfoWars and they've done some. Yeah. So anyway, it hasn't made it to mainstream yet, but it could be there any moment.
Yes. Well, we're sharing with people we know in the media as well. So hopefully you'll get some other more mainstream interviews on this topic. Anything else you'd like to say that we didn't cover, or?
Well, just go to 7discoveries.com. For those viewers that would like a hard copy of what the justices actually have, you can order that for a $30 gift at 7discoveries.com. And also there's some signed copies available for if you have really deep pockets for $1,000 gift. You can have signed by the Brunson Brothers petition. That's an exact copy of what the justices are using, perfect bound. That'll come in the mail signed. And you can, there's a phone number at 7discoveries.com. You can call if you want to order one of those directly through the phone with a credit card. And so that's about it. Just thank you, Tamara, for having me on.
Thank you. I really
Thank
appreciate you being here and explaining all of this. This is very exciting. I'm watching this very closely and can't wait. January 6th has become quite an important date for me personally too. I'm actually Ukrainian by descent, so we celebrate Ukrainian Christmas Eve on January 6th.
Oh my gosh!
I know. So I know. So it's a very special and sacred day on our calendar, and now it's sort of has a black mark with the January 6th insurrection, and now we have this case. So it's a very key date for so many reasons.
Great.
So again, thank you, and I hope you feel better and you get over your cold. And Happy New Year.
Great. Same to you, Tamara. Thank you.